of the storytelling comes in, because now you're not ready to change, right? The light bulb doesn't want to change yet. So what do? You start constructing narratives that help to justify the continued behavior, right? So now you say, oh, my parents were terrible to me, and and this happened, and that happened. And of course, part of the problem is, other people who may know more about your personal history might want to argue with you. Well, that didn't happen that way. But that's beside the point, right? It's sort of like, I mean, as a parent, I have 3 kids. They're all in their 20s now, thankfully. But when they were in their teens, I mean, I would find myself routinely having arguments with them in which I had to keep reminding myself, this conversation is not about what it appears to be about. Right? They are arguing about this thing, but there's something else that's bothering them, and we're not talking about that. We're having this argument. And I think we do. I think people in recovery do, or particularly in pre-recovery, do a lot of that as well. In which there's a lot of stories and things that they tell that are not really about whatever it is that's going on in that ghost system, but it's an easy thing to talk about. And if someone tries to argue with the substance of that story, they're having an argument that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's, I think, another piece that plays into what you were talking about.
We have one half of the identical twin set.
Yeah, I noticed this one. This is my older sister.
Cool.
Yeah, but, I'm in recovery and my twin is not. So I think there shows.
Yeah.
It's interesting to consider this.
Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because again, the only thing identical about identical twins is your genetic makeup. That's it.
That's all.
That's it.
That's it.
Right. But when you think about all that we thought we knew about genes that was wrong,
Yeah.
and how much genes are, and the regulation of genes is controlled by things that, some of which are genes and some of which are not genes, and so now there's all this other stuff that makes it seem like, well, those are identical people. Actually, it's like, well, they might have the identical sort of formula at the very beginning, but that formula is influenced by all this other stuff, some of which we know about, most of which I would assert we don't know about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you talk about like nature via nurture, right?
Yeah.
We both grew up in the same environment, yet we're very different people as
Yeah.
well. So it is pretty interesting to take a perspective, that kind of perspective.
And I think, when we talk about human beings and human behavior, we're complicated. And no one likes complications. We think, can't we just simplify this and make it this simple thing? You know what I mean? Like there's going to be a simple solution, there's a simple explanation, and sometimes there are, but lots of times there's a very circuitous route that each of us took to get to where we are. And it's very difficult from that experience to decide what cause resulted in what effect. Because there are so many things that are interacting, and I think this was Wrigley's point about nature via nurture, right? There are so many interactive variables that are influencing how we behave and what we do and who we think we are and all those kind of things, that to try to say, well, first let's get an explanation. And I think Art referred to something earlier that I just want to bring up again about what we can do as individuals and what we can do to help individuals who do want to change, who are in recovery or maybe even in pre-recovery, right? And that's the idea of stopping versus learning things that are incompatible with the things you don't want. I mean, I think stopping anything is hard. Whatever it is. I mean, even finding, for people who are quick-witted and sarcastic, and they inadvertently hurt people's feelings, and you think, stop doing that. Well, it just wells up, and it's so clever, it's got to come out, But imagine you said,
Is this an intervention?
we'll get to you in a minute. But I mean, so rather than saying that, can you actually create something different, something different to say in that situation that is incompatible with the thing that you would have said that you'd rather not say?
That's a great point.
See, it works. But I think those kinds of things we underestimate. Even those of us who have not suffered from an addiction, right? At least an addiction at the level that required an intervention beyond ourselves. We underestimate we overestimate how much control we have over what we're doing. And I think as human beings, we don't like to think of how much of our lives are determined by just random shit. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really nice to think that there's this orderly thing to life, and this happens, and then if I do this, that will happen. And some of my lovely students, I'm an academic advisor in our college, in the Butler School. And freshmen come in and they have this plan. I'm going to do this, and then 4 years from now I'm going to graduate school here, and then I'm going to get this job, and then I'm going to do this thing, and then a year later I'm going to go back and get my doctorate. And I'm thinking, no, you're not. But and part of, as all of us in this room of a certain age realize, right? It's not a matter of making really specific plans and following through with them. That's not the key to having a successful life where you have a sense of well-being. It's having some ideas about what you'd like to do, and then having the intellectual, emotional, personal flexibility to deal with all the things that you never anticipated. And what I think throws many people for a loop is not that they have the wrong plans or they didn't make the right choice or whatever, but they have an inflexibility that completely discombobulates everything when this was supposed to happen and now that didn't happen. And I was told I was really smart, and if I studied really hard, I'd get into Stanford, and I didn't get into Stanford, and now my life is over, and that happens understandably, right? Because what's not said at the beginning is, there's so many things that contribute to what's actually going to happen, and we can't control most of them. And that's one of the hardest things for anybody who I think suffers from addiction to say, is I can't control everything. So you can either futilely try to control everything and fail, right? Or you can say, I can't control everything. So I need to enlist all of the resources that are in my realm to help guide me on whatever path I think I'd like to go on.
And this relates now, I think, to another concept that's quite important, which is this whole notion of resilience, right? And one of the other issues is, when you recognize that the plans that you make are tentative and are likely to fail, at least as you drew them out up front, you are now faced with the prospect of having to deal with goal failures. Right? Now, the way that the motivational system is set up, the motivational system, because it doesn't connect well to the cortex, it doesn't mean it doesn't communicate at all with the rest of the brain. It just means it doesn't communicate in as fine-grained a way as we'd like in order to be able to tell good stories about what we're doing. The way that the motivational system communicates with the rest of the brain is it generates feelings. Right? So basically, when you're feeling, when you're basically accomplishing your goals, you feel good. And when you're not accomplishing your goals, you feel bad. And the more invested you are in those goals, the stronger the feeling that you have, right? And then you have to interpret what does that mean. And there's a whole what's called an attribution process that we go through to try to understand what am I really feeling right now, and what emotion goes along with that. But one of the things that matters with that is bad feelings. They're physically painful, right? And that's on purpose, because we don't want to keep doing stuff that causes us to fail at our goals. And so the way we do that is we feel a little bit of pain, psychic pain associated with goal failure, so that we stop doing that thing. Well, okay, so this sets the stage. Now, here's the problem. We have to practice overcoming that psychological pain and moving on to do something productive. And there are two pieces to this. First of all, some people feel that pain more strongly than others, right? And the second is, some people get more practice at overcoming that and creating a habit to move forward in a productive way than others do, right? For a variety of reasons. Right? Some of which may be genetic, some of which may be upbringing. So what happens is, the very same experience that is a goal failure, you don't get into the class you wanted to get into, that you were trying to sign up for, or you got a D on your first exam in college, or whatever it is, that experience is debilitating for some people, and it is just another thing to other people, and they move on and work harder. And and for those people for whom those failures are so painful that they have no strategy for doing something productive to move forward, this creates bad outcomes. For some students, it means they drop out of school. For others, it means that, well, they have a psychological pain. Something that would dull that pain would be awfully nice right about now, right? And so layered on top of all of the rest of this is that even after you help people to begin to change some of their habits that may be contributing to an addiction, and this is why up front I said addictions are a perfect storm of psychological characteristics, because it's, you know, on top of the habit component, there's also a resilience component, right? Of you know, for many people, how do you help them to not be devastated by a particular goal failure, by creating strategies for, here's a way to overcome this situation that didn't allow you to achieve the goal that you wanted to achieve.
And you know, there is a habit strength that develops over a lifetime of experiences that allow us to predict positive outcomes in the face of adversity. I mean, Art and I often talk about the whole reason for brains is to be able to predict what's about to happen, because we're advantaged by knowing what to expect, what's going to come next, right? And as those of us sort of navigate the world, I know what it feels like to open a door, so I generally know how much force I need to apply to get the door open. I know that if I'm introduced to somebody the first time and I smile at them, they'll often smile back. I mean, there are all kinds of things all kinds of ways that I can predict what's about to happen, because my memories have taught me some things that now lead me to predict, right? And one of the things that I predict is what happens when I succeed at doing something, and what happens when I don't succeed at doing something, right? And over my lifetime, because again, I was very smart and chose really wonderful parents, right? I've learned over my lifespan, I have a history of not succeeding, expending further effort, and eventually getting to some successful outcome, or at least getting through whatever it is I'm trying to get through. I have a history of that. And the word that Art used in the last few comments was the idea of practice. I practiced that. Now, so that's my expectation, right? When I run into something that's difficult and it's not going well, I have an expectation that it's eventually going to go well, and I have a history that's recorded in my memory that tells me that, right? Now, if you don't have that, if a person doesn't have that, right? If you bump up against something challenging and it doesn't go well, and what your memory is telling you is most of the things when I've been in a situation, it has not gone well, and I subvert the experience of persisting by taking a drug or engaging in some behavior that many other people would describe as self-destructive, well, now I've deviated my attention from that thing, and now I'm on to something else. But what I've missed is the opportunity to persist and then come to a more successful outcome. Right? And if that happens often enough, and this is one of the sort of snowballing effects of addiction, right? I'm continuing to miss out on opportunities to see what I'm capable of doing by persisting in a course of action, or adjusting my course of action carefully enough that I come to a successful outcome, or at least a satisfying outcome as I define it. Right?
And this is part of the danger of participation trophies.
Right.
I mean, you know, because as Bob was saying, right, you got to practice.
Participation trophies?
Yeah, you got to practice not getting what you want and having to work harder to get it. And if you don't practice it, you don't learn to do it. And part of the problem is if everyone gets a trophy, then it's not so much then I'm gonna misvalue rewards. I mean, that's another issue. But it doesn't prepare you for all the things that you have to do in your life that are going to require real effort in order to succeed. Mm-hmm. And the part of the problem is when you're 8. I mean, again, as a parent of a child, I've seen my kids heartbroken over stuff they didn't get. And as a parent, of course, the first thing you want to do is to not put them in that situation because they're crying. And little kids crying is very sad. But when you're 8, generally speaking, the stakes for failure are very low. Right? It's probably not going to keep you out of UT or whatever. I mean, it's whatever your lofty life goal is. Chances are, whatever you fail at when you're 8 isn't going to, isn't gonna end at all.
No chance to be a fireman
Yeah.
anymore, yeah.
No more race car driver.
Yeah.
So, but you know, at 18 or 22 or, you know, then the stakes are higher, right? And if you've practiced at 8 how to overcome this, and then practiced it again at 9 and 10 and 11 and so on, then by the time you're 18, you're better at it, right? And so you're not doing it for the first time when the stakes are high, right? And that, to me, that's the problem with, you know, everyone gets a trophy, everyone gets a certificate, right? Is no, actually, sometimes you should lose.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. What if you always lose though, and you never win, like one of these kids? So what type of programs could help them learn how to put effort and not give up as soon as they get
That's
frustrated?
a great question.
Yes.
You know, what I was saying earlier about how slowly the brain changes, particularly how slowly the more primitive, action-oriented parts of the brains change. I think many people are not aware that when you change a memory in an organic brain, the brain has to actually grow new stuff. I mean, it's biologically expensive to change your mind. You know? I mean, people think of memories like computer memories, where I just want to change that, I just click a button and I say save, and it says overwrite, and I go yes, and now there's a new memory there. You know, I didn't have to think anything, right? And many people sort of apply that to organic brains, which organic memories don't work like that. It takes, and to use Art's word, effort, and it takes a tremendous amount of energy to change the way brains form memories, the way brains remember what's happened in the past and predict what's going to happen in the future. So I think the idea about, you know, how do you create a different kind of expectation is whoever's controlling the environment, whether it's the person themselves or the people who are helping them with whatever kind of therapy or counseling or whatever, create practice opportunities where the challenges are small enough that you can actually overcome the challenge. And I think, you know, every time anybody's been suffering from any bad feelings, I mean, for anyone who's ever experienced an endogenous depression, for example, that's a dark place to be. I mean, it's dark. And for people who, you know, have your best intentions, have your goodwill at heart, and say, well, just you know, put on a happy face. Just, I mean, they just have never experienced what that's like, right? And as Art's saying, if I can find some chemical that will help me alleviate that kind of feeling, do that. But I think one thing is that's been demonstrated to help people overcome a depressive episode, right, is finding small goals that can be set and met and accomplished. And it's the lack of those goals in memory. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens, almost all categories of mental ill health somehow are involved in interrupted or some way deteriorating sleep. I mean, sleep is a huge aspect of human functioning. I mean, we sleep for a reason. And if you think, why would evolution develop a system where an organism would be unconscious a third of every day? There has to be a good reason for that, right? And there is a good reason, and it's because of all the things the brain does during sleep that not only take care of organizing memories that have happened in the waking day, but also clearing the brain of substances that have accumulated that are not advantageous to have as part of the structure of the brain. But one thing that's interesting about sleep, people who have studied what happens under sleep deprivation, one thing that's pretty consistently demonstrated is that you tend to not remember as well positive things from a previous day, and your memories of negative things from a previous day are seemingly unaffected. Now that's a dramatic result, and it's very consistent, right? That if you're underslept, whatever that happens to be, and of course we need much more sleep than most of us would like to think we need, right? But if you're underslept and you're already feeling bad about things, right? With each waking day, that bad feeling is accumulating, and even positive things that actually take place are less likely to be remembered because of a lack of sleep. So, I know it's a long answer to a very short question, but I think the importance of that, about creating deliberate instances of, I'm gonna set a little goal, and I'm gonna accomplish it. It almost doesn't matter whether the goal matters about anything except just doing the goal. It doesn't have to be some grandiose thing, some little thing. And you think, you know what, that thing wasn't done, and then I worked on it, and then I finished it. That's a thing, you know.
And I want to emphasize one thing in that, which is there's a difference in the words that you used, and I want to emphasize that for an important reason.
Yeah.
So you said, what if you never win?
But you never manage to achieve that. You're always
Well,
punished,
yeah.
constantly punished.
Right, well, so, but I want to point out, right, that it's not, you know, so participation trophies and things like that are actually, what we do is we sort of tell everyone you're winning, no matter what you've done. And I think what's important is to recognize it's not really about winning. It's about
Oh,
achieving,
yeah.
no, and I don't mean that you meant that necessarily, but I want to highlight the word because I think we do that, we use that a lot. And it's part of our justification for just doling out rewards. I think what's really important is we have to think about how do we create environments and scaffold environments for everyone that makes sure that people understand how to succeed at the things that they're doing. And this is one of the reasons why, I mean, when you now begin to look, for example, at people who are starting recovery, where it seems like a daunting task, right? So how can I just get through the next hour? Right, or the next 10 minutes, right? Or how do I go one time where I wanted to use my drug of choice and didn't, right? It's starting with those very small achievable goals that's really critical. And that's true across the board from early childhood onward. So it's not that we want to teach kids always lose, right? But we also want them to understand that sometimes you have to work harder than you just did in order to achieve the big thing you want to achieve. But still to recognize here's a little thing you could do today that would allow you to be able to do something tomorrow that you weren't able to do today. And that's just, I just wanted to kind of say it.
I think it's also important though to realize that not all of those experiences have to be our own. Like we can
Right.
learn from other people. That's why it's important to talk about failure and overcoming failure also.
Although it's dangerous there, because a lot of times, so for example, you know, Bob, as it turns out, is a very accomplished human being. And so it's easy to hear his stories and to go, well, either you're being falsely modest or you're just kind of an amazing person. I could never do that.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's actually really hard. It's hard to learn from other people unless you're absolutely sure you're like them in some way. So for example, if you think about recovery programs, I mean, you know, one of the reasons why people's stories of addiction and recovery are so important to others who are starting is because they have to be able to identify with other people at their worst in order to feel like their success is something that would be relevant to them. So it has to be very constrained, because if you don't completely identify with them, it can be then you actually can have the opposite effect, which is to think, yeah, sure, you could do it,
Yeah.
but you're so much better than I am that I could never do what you did.
Well, and a more fundamental thing underlying what Art was just saying is that part of our brain that Art was talking about can't learn vicariously. I mean, we because the storytelling brain can't tell that part what to do, and because what we hear about other people, that's talking to the story part of our brain. I mean, actually experiencing something, whatever that happens to be, is necessary to get that circuitry to actually operate the way you want it to operate over a long period of time. But you know, it's a funny thing. I think what happens for many people who are suffering from addiction is the sense of helplessness. You know, like I just have no agency in this. I'm just at the mercy of whatever the vicissitudes of life that I bump into. You know, and it doesn't take a lot to actually start showing a relationship between my decision to act and my actually coming to a conclusion that I sought out. But it has to start out with very small goals. Like I was saying, like the next 10 minutes, and all the things about, you know, just one day at a time, and all that. Goals that are set far in the future, almost nobody accomplishes goals that they set a year from now. It might seem like they do, but that goal comprises countless sub-goals along the way. You know, and Art and Rebecca, we have to hear my Weight Watcher story about my mother. But they love it too. But my other mother, who had struggled with her weight throughout her entire life, you know, been on every diet known to man, and she was living in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s when charlatans were promoting every kind of, you know, BS kind of diet they did, and she did all of them, right? And her weight always vacillated. She'd lose some weight, and then she gained more than she was before she went on the diet. This went on through her whole life, until she went to Weight Watchers when I was an undergraduate, and she started going to Weight Watchers. And I was home from college on a break, and she was telling me how happy she was going to Weight Watchers. She didn't look that different to me yet, but she felt really great, and her weight was going down. And so I asked her if I'd go to a meeting with her, and I went with her to Weight Watchers, you know. And we go to the meeting, and the first thing they do at Weight Watchers is they weigh you. You know, I didn't know this, and so they write it down. And then at some point in the meeting, they read out the names of all the people who had lost weight that week. Right, and so they got to my mother's name and said, and Gert lost two pounds this week. Well, you would have thought it was VE day again. Everybody's cheering, you know, whoa, you know, they're so excited she lost 2 pounds. Now, I don't know how much my mother weighed at the time, but the difference between whatever she weighed the week before and after losing 2 pounds is imperceptible to the human visual system, right? There are no fat clothes that you start moving to the back of your closet and start moving up your skinny clothes when you lose 2 pounds, right? But if you weren't taking data, that would be an imperceptible change that's going in the right direction that you wouldn't notice. And what happens when anyone is on any difficult path, it doesn't matter what the path is, if you're trying to write a book, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to recover from addiction, whatever it happens to be, you have to pay attention to the things that happen that are small but moving in the right direction. You know? And many people's, I think, failures to succeed in overcoming or accomplishing whatever their goal happens to be is not a result of their fundamental incapacity to do it. It's that they haven't noticed the progress that they've made and been reinforced by it, right? It's like, well, I'm still not there. Well, you're not going to be there for another year, or you're not going to be there, which you said for yourself, ever. But look, you're 2 steps closer to that than you were an hour ago, or yesterday, or whatever it happens to be.
But this gets back to the resilience piece. 'Cause
Yeah.
one of the dangers with this is how do you deal with the week when you gain weight?
Right.
Right? And this is actually, I mean, so if you look at a lot of the research on 12-step recovery programs, for example, one of the, I mean, depending on the research you look at, they work for somewhere between 12 and 35% of people. And it's hard to predict who it's going to be. And one of the issues is, well, if you're counting, if the program requires abstinence, and you build up a certain amount of time, and then you relapse, you go back to 0.
Yeah.
Right? You don't take 1 step back; you take all the steps back. Right? And that's a big blow to some people. For some people, it's motivating, and for some people, it's a complete blow. And this is where, you know, one of the things that Weight Watchers does pretty well is actually to recognize that weight loss is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right? And that as long as you over a longer period of time take more steps forward than steps back, you're doing well. And so. So, you know, one of the, again, you know, teaching these skills to say, I didn't succeed at this thing I wanted to do today. And that's not good, but it's also not a sign that I should give up altogether. And this leads to one of my favorite names for an effect in all of psychology. So this, you can look this up. There's a thing called the what the hell effect.
Yes.
And the what the hell effect says there's some criteria, right? Whatever it is, like, you know, I'm not gonna overeat, right? And if the world is divided into days in which I overate and didn't overeat, as soon as I cross the line, you know, I'm gonna be under 2,000 calories today, and then I go over 2,000, and I'm like, well, the hell with it. I got over 2,000, you know, and the next thing you know, you're covered in candy wrappers and there's crumbs everywhere, right? And that's a resilience failure in part, right? I mean, so how, you know, part of what you want to do is to say, okay, I was at 2,100 today, and that's more than I wanted to be, but I was only 100 over the line. Let's see if I can bring that back, and not lose sight of what I've accomplished. And that's a, you know, that's a very hard process for people in general, and a particularly hard process for people who are dealing with addiction.
And you know, there's a paradoxical thing that's very interesting about how you calibrate your interpretations of the inevitable vacillations in life, right? I mean, all our days aren't alike. You know, some days are a little better than others, some days a little worse, right? And the people who struggle the most are people who miscalibrate the magnitude of those differences, right? I work with a lot of undergraduates who are preparing to be teachers. And the first time they'll go out to teach, you know, because they're new, all the kids are paying attention to them, because they're curious about them, you know, and maybe after they teach a lesson, you know, some little kid will come and say, will you be our teacher forever, you know? And my student come back the next day and say, oh my God, I know I'm in the right major, this is like the best thing in the world. That kid's gonna be crying soon. I mean, my student, because they've miscalibrated, right? I mean, yeah, okay, you had a pretty good day, but now they think it was like the most amazing thing that ever happened. So 2 days from now, when that same kid comes up and goes, you suck. Well, now I need to change my major because I shouldn't be doing this, you know. So the interesting part is, this is where you have to set the calibration, is to make, you have to temper that great, this is like the greatest thing that ever happened. No, it's not. Because if you think this is the greatest thing that ever happened, when the bad things happen, you're going to think, okay, my life is over. And both of those are wrong. Because basically, on a day-to-day basis, that vacillating curve goes on for most of us. But what we'd like to have happen is the trend line's going up, even though the curve is going above and below the trend line day in and day out. But that's a challenging thing, again, right? Because when people are successful and things are going well, and you think, this is fantastic, well, it's probably not as fantastic as you think it is, you know? And when it's awful, and you say, this is really awful, well, it's probably not as awful as you think it is either. This is just what happens in life, you know? And I think many young people who have such a high achievement orientation, you know, when their curve dips below the trend line, their reaction to it is so severe that they misperceive this little dip as some great, you know, cavernous thing that's just happened, and they now react to it in a way that's out of perspective for what of it. I mean, that's one of the advantages of being old, is that you can look back at your trend line, and you can look back at all of this, and I can see in my own experience, I think anybody my age, or maybe not even as old, can see there were things in my life earlier that I reacted to that I thought were so important and so amazing or so devastating, and they were neither, you know. But of course, you can't tell people that. You have to live that.
And one of the things that this also relates to is, if you look at depression and anxiety, one of the really common behaviors that comes along with that, even if you're not even below sort of clinical levels of depression and anxiety, is this concept of rumination, right? Which is, again, one of my favorite words, right? Rumination comes from the word ruminant, which is an animal that chews its cud. And rumination is just thinking over and over, or chewing over some generally bad thing that happened to you recently, where you can take a single bad episode and turn it into a week's worth of bad episode. Just by continuing to think about it. And you know, we've all experienced this to some degree, right? Where you know, you had an interaction with a friend or a colleague, and you said something, and after you said it, they looked crestfallen by what you said, and now you start thinking, did I insult them? What did I say? And then you start playing over, could I have done